Ladies and gentlemen, this is the 12th and final round.
Right hand, Golovkin steps in and down he goes again. Unbelievable. Mayweather makes him pay. What a rookie mistake. A sensational left hook by De La Hoya.
It's facts. I'm the best. You know what I mean? Sometimes I don't want to believe it myself, but it's the truth. I'm the best.
I'm going to show you how great I am.
From Southern California, this is the Last Round Podcast.
Welcome back to episode 150 of the Last Round Podcast. Thank you again for joining us, whether you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Boxing Social, wherever you're at, however you're listening. We appreciate it. Coming off another boxing weekend with a new world champion at 130 pounds. But this week he returns once again. I think he might be close to double digits on this podcast, or at least close to it. Yahoo Sports' Kevin Iole joins us again from Las Vegas. Thank you again for joining us, Kevin.
Absolutely. Happy to be here. We're getting to be like we're cousins or something.
I know, right? Might as well. Invite us to the barbecue, Kevin. Invite us to the barbecue. But like I mentioned, this past Saturday, the 23rd of October, from the State Farm Arena in Atlanta, Georgia, on ESPN Plus, Shakur Stevenson gets the 10th round TKO over Jamel Semperfi Herring and becomes the new WBO super featherweight world champion. So one of the main reasons, obviously, that we wanted you on this week, Kevin, is because we know how highly you think of Shakur Stevenson. So as we were Mike and I were going back and forth on a guest for this week, Mike was like, well, why don't we just get Kevin Iole? He was like, he knows a lot about Shakur. I was like, he's so far so good. He's right about his prediction on him. So what did you think about the fight as you were watching it? And then where does Shakur go from here?
I had Shakur in my pound for pound top 10 until his previous fight. And I took him out because there was a couple performances of guys, Josh Taylor and some other guys. And I thought, who did he fight his last fight? I'm forgetting who it was. Nakathila, right? And I didn't feel like it was his best performance, and I had other guys that I kind of felt like needed to get in. So I took Shakur out. But I looked at Shakur and I wrote all last week. No, he was mad at me. And he gave me no end of shit. First, he sent me what seemed like a nice tweet when I took him out. He said, "So quick," and I'm going, "Dude, I'm the only one that has you in." And you're giving me shit. But then when I interviewed him, I mean, he was not the nicest guy in the world. When I talked to him, he was mad that he felt like I was abandoning him, if that's the right word. And anyway, but I felt like he really stepped up his game, and he did what he had to do against Jamel Herring. Herring is not an elite superstar type fighter, but he's you have to be really good to beat Jamel Herring. You have to be in shape, and you have to be ready to fight. And Shakur was all those things. And I think Shakur is a guy that can be pound for pound the best fighter in the world. He's not yet, but I think he has that kind of talent. And I thought we saw that. I thought there's nothing you can really criticize his game for. Offense, defense, he threw combinations, people who said he was boring, he stood in the pocket and fought. I equated it on Twitter to Floyd's win, and you guys were too young, but Floyd's win over Genaro Hernandez, right? I think you guys were in the crib, at least one of you, when that fight happened. But, Floyd just kind of had stepped it up. And against Genaro Hernandez, who was the best 130 in the world at the time and dominated him. And I saw similar things in this fight. Jamel, a really solid fighter, and Shakur just stepped it up, and bingo, I thought made a huge stride and really established himself, in my opinion.
Obviously, a lot of attention was on the odds leading up to this fight. Shakur was a very, very big favorite. Did you think that was appropriate now looking back on the win?
I thought the number was too high just because how are you going to get people to bet on him? Like when I wrote my betting prediction, a lot of people after the fight said, "Oh, you're an idiot. You had the wrong pick." I said bet on Herring, but what I said in my betting column was I think the first sentence was Shakur Stevenson will win this fight, but I can't lay minus 1900, right? And I bet 1900 to win 100. No, I can't do that. So I thought the number was too high, and so my advice was, hey, Herring's a pretty good guy. If you got to make a bet, getting him at whatever it was, plus 800 or plus 900, is worth a gamble if Shakur doesn't show up. But, again, I said in my lead, Shakur's going to win the fight, and he did, and so I thought the number was too high because beating a guy having a guy of that caliber, hey, it's not the greatest upset of all time, but that's a huge upset, and I thought Jamel was a little better than that. But, hey, at the end of the day, Shakur was the better fighter, and he got the win.
How much do you think, Kevin, that – because obviously boxing fans know that Shakur and Jamel have been in the same training camp together, right. Bomac, Terence, Crawford. So they've seen a lot of each other. There's been pictures posted of both of them, it seems like, after a sparring session. So they've been – they've seen each other. They've seen how each other works, like how each other work, the quirks and everything. How much do you think that helped someone like Shakur Stevenson in the way he essentially dominated the fight?
I think, it's probably a wash because both guys had, knowledge of the other, right? I think this came down to physical skills. Shakur was far too fast and far too quick and far too accurate of a puncher. I mean, I think at the end of the day, a scouting report is one thing, but you look at what he was able to accomplish in there, and it was all that, the better physical skills, I thought. And so, I think, it was a wash for everything that Shakur learned about Jamel. Jamel learned something about Shakur, so I don't make too much of that.
How did in any of your columns leading up to the fight, Kevin, did you speculate on how possibly Jamel could possibly win the fight? Is there anything that he could have done, or is it just he was just facing a better caliber of a fighter?
I think, you have, like, I remember saying to Jamel, he's so much faster than you and, and all that stuff, like, kind of what do you do? And, he says timing and accuracy beats speed. And that is true if the guy with the speed is kind of not in the same level. But, I mean, Shakur was, not only was quicker, but I mean, he, his timing was great too, and his accuracy was great. So he set up his shots appropriately, and he was getting off. I thought, to me, like, the way Jamel was going to win that fight was kind of, use a jab a lot, slow the fight down, make it ugly, muck it up, on the ropes and everything in there, and just hope to kind of steal some rounds. Because if you let Shakur fight in the center of the ring and you're trying to fight that kind of fight with him, he's just got, he's got too much to give. But I felt like if, Jamel could, like, kind of jab him into the corner and, sort of force the referee to get involved a lot and making an ugly fight, and a fight that people would have been not happy with watching, that would have been his best way. But he was really fighting it up. It was like he was going into the Indy 500 with a car that couldn't go more than 80 miles an hour. You're kind of in trouble at that point.
Where does someone like Jamel Herring go from here? Because he's obviously been the underdog, like he's mentioned in many of his fights, especially since he won the world title. So where does he go from here now that he lost the title to someone like Shakur?
If he wants to continue to fight, and my take from what he said in the ring is that he's thinking about retirement. That was kind of what I took from his comments in the ring, and that would not be a bad thing. He's 35 years old. He's been around a long time. Hasn't had a lot of fights, but he has a lot of experience. But I think that there's some big fights for him should he want to stick around. I think that there are fights that he can take that would make sense. Obviously, I think the fight that Top Rank is going to try to make is not the one that Shakur wants. I think Top Rank is going to try to make Loma versus Shakur and not Oscar Valdez. That's the fight. I talked to Top Rank President Todd Dubois, and that's kind of, sort of he was thinking out loud, but that's a fight that he's interested in. So if they go that route, Jamel maybe, put him in there against Oscar Valdez potentially as a fight, with the idea that you build up Oscar a little bit if he beats Jamel, and then you have him available down the road. I kind of disagree with that theory. I like going, the logical route, go the 130 route, get Oscar Valdez. He had that big win over Belcher. I think, if you beat him, that's a win that means something. You're a unified champion, and then you can go to a Loma. But I think Loma's probably complaining to them, I want a big fight, right? And Loma's kind of, Teofimo, who originally, in fact, when Loma fought Nakatani, I sat at that fight with Loma's mother and father. Now, the father was not next to me all that often because he kept getting up and running around and yelling and doing everything. But I had his mother on the left of me the entire night, and his father on the right of me for a good part of the night. And they said they were there to, hopefully let Loma know they wanted a rematch. And what was that, in June? And now here we are in October, and Teofimo wants no part of Loma. He's moved on, So I think Top Rank has a Loma problem, and they need to get him a big fight. And Loma doesn't want to fight jabronis. He wants to get in there and fight somebody that that means something. And so I think, a Shakur Stevenson would be a fight that, Loma would like. So I think that, they're going to talk to Shakur about that. But, who knows, what success they have. And if Shakur argues that, I don't blame him. I like, his argument, I think, is the stronger argument.
Kevin, did they say the reasoning behind the Loma fight, or was it just to try and pick him a fight? Because they've got two different paths. And obviously one of the paths is going to end if they do that, which is kind of unusual.
So you're talking about Top Rank?
Yeah, Shakur Loma by Top Rank.
I think Todd Dubois' idea is this: let's put the most compelling fight we can on TV, and let the chips fall where they may. Now, he doesn't always get his way in those things, right? Even though he's the president of the company, things don't always work out the way he would. But that's kind of how he. Oops, sorry about that.
Okay.
I dropped the phone. And he doesn't always get his way on those things. And, ESPN has a say in it. Bob Arum has a say in it. The fighters have a say. The matchmakers have a say. So there's a lot of people that are involved in this. But I think Todd's idea, which I agree with, I'm not saying that they're executing on the idea perfectly, but Todd's idea is, hey, we will put our top guys against anybody. We'll put our top guys against each other, and let's put them on free TV. He told me they would rather not even do pay-per-view for several years. Now they're being forced into it by, they couldn't have gotten the Sean Porter fight by going on ESPN. They had to do pay-per-view for Terence Crawford. But, he said, I like to put everything on ESPN for a couple of years and really build the sport up and put these compelling fights so that when we go back onto pay-per-view, now we have something, people are into the sport and we build it up. So, his theory and how he wants to do it, I love that. And so that's his thing. He feels like that fight is the best fight to make, and that it would be compelling theater, and it would be. You can sell that fight really well. Loma, a lot of people consider him pound for pound. Shakur, a lot of people think he might be pound for pound in the future. The past versus the present, that type of thing, or past versus the future. So I think that's sort of where he's looking at. So that's kind of what Todd is going to. Shakur, I think when you look at his stance, he's saying, hey, I want to fight the guy everybody thought was number one in the division after beating Belcher.
Right.
What do you think? Obviously, Shakur's already, a world champion in 2 weight divisions. With his physical attributes, where do you think he'll finish? What weight category?
He told me when I talked to him last week, or got lectured by him, might be the better way to say it, that he thought he could go up to 47 and win titles all the way up through there. I wonder if, if 40 might not be as high as he goes. He's a strong kid, and, at his skill level, his skill can make up. But when you start to get up to 47, you just look at him next to Terence Crawford, right? And there's a big physicality difference between him and Terence Crawford. Obviously, he's not ready to fight someone like Crawford yet, and Crawford is a much more mature guy. But, Shakur told me he thought he could go to 47. And, there have been, Mayweather started at 130, Oscar started at 130, so he started at 126, just a little bit up. But hey, Pacquiao started at what? Light flyweight, right? So, this isn't the farthest anybody would have moved up. I don't know that Shakur's frame is ever going to really, suit him at welterweight. I think, he might be best at lightweight or at 140, when he's mature and strong and all that. But, I could he win a world title at 147? I think he could.
Do you think that, because you mentioned how he wants to go to 147 throughout the rest of his career, do you think there's any correlation between him and like a Mikey Garcia, where Mikey's not really like a 147 pounder? Do you think it's kind of like how Shakur would be?
No, I don't. I think Shakur is looking at it a little differently than Mikey. I think Shakur is looking at it systematically. Let's clean out 30. Let's go to 35, then move up 40 to 47. So he's looking at 47 in a couple of years. Mikey, I think, is like, Mikey is more a businessman than a boxer, and I don't blame him for that. Mikey made a lot of money. He got rich on his own in real estate, right? Mikey's a hell of a real estate broker, makes a ton of money doing that, and he realized, hey, why don't I do this in boxing as well? And he cherry picks fights where he says, hey, I'm good enough to beat these guys and move different weight classes, and and that's kind of how how he's been pulling it. I think Mikey would have been great at 140, and he could have had a run and made some. I think you're taking money, would have made some big money had he stayed there for a while. But, I don't think that they're the same. I think Shakur is kind of looking in the Mayweather, De La Hoya mold of, 4 or 5, weight division champion. That's sort of what he envisions. So he's at 2 now. If he gets to welterweight with champions all the way, that would be 5. That'd be a pretty, for a small kid like him, that would be a pretty good accomplishment.
I was just about to ask you that. That was my next thing. I was going to put you on the spot, and I was going to say, so you think 5 different weight categories, Kevin, by the time he retires?
I think he can do it. It's going to be interesting to see, to watch that journey. I think when he gets to 40 and really 47, now the rubber's going to meet the road there, because you're going to get these dudes that, they're not that far. Hey, look, we had Errol Spence talking, or people talking about Errol Spence going to fight Golovkin, right? just recently, or Canelo. And, Errol Spence is a welterweight. You get to that range and you're starting to get into the big dudes in there. And, Shakur is never going to be considered a big dude, right? And I think that, but I think he's such a skilled fighter, and he's such a smart fighter in the ring, and he's so well coached and well prepared and he has so much experience that I think, will he be the best in the world when he's a welterweight? Like, you look at the progression of some of these guys. Mayweather was great at all these weights, but he was best at welterweight. Oscar De La Hoya, I think, same thing. Best at welterweight. And these guys have won, multiple championships. Manny stayed there. I would say Manny maybe wasn't his best at welterweight, but he stayed at welterweight a long time and made a lot of defenses and made a lot of money at that weight. I don't know that that's going to be Shakur's thing, but I think he can win a title at that weight, so it'll have historical significance, no doubt.
What do you think is the toughest matchup for Shakur at 130 pounds? Is it Valdez? Or is it Lomachenko?
Are we considering Tank Davis no longer, on 130, because he's, still had but I guess Valdez would be the guy, right? I mean, that would make sense, there. I think that would be the guy I would look at. I thought Valdez really stepped up his game. I actually thought Belchert was going to beat him. Yeah. I just thought Belchert was so big and so strong that I thought, he would kind of walk Oscar down. And, Oscar had, had been a guy that had shown he would get hit in fights. And, give Eddie Reynoso credit. Oscar's defense, nobody's ever going to compare him to Willie Pepper Floyd Mayweather, but, his defense was better. He wasn't getting hit by those big clean shots against Miguel, that he had been getting hit before, and that helped him. I think you got to give Reynoso credit for that. So I think it's fair to say that the big fight at 130 would be Valdez.
You touched on how Todd Dubois possibly wanted to make Loma Stevenson. I'm assuming that would be at 130 because Loma could probably still make that weight, right?
Yeah, we honestly didn't talk about weight. I would assume that that's what he was talking about too, but we did not discuss weight when we talked about it. So I just kind of was like, what are you thinking for Shakur? And that was kind of, we got into that discussion and didn't even really discuss weight.
Right. Yeah, well, that definitely would be interesting. Moving on that card, Xander Zayas remains undefeated with the victory over Dan Carpensi, who takes the fourth loss of his career. What do you think of the potential behind Zayas is, Kevin? What do you think? Where do you think his ceiling is at?
I like him, but I don't know if you saw my tweet on Saturday. I thought the broadcast way oversold him, right? Timothy Bradley said, "Greatness, ladies and gentlemen, greatness." No, I think he's a good prospect, one of the better young fighters, and you have to consider he's 19 years old, right? And he's a great kid. Like I've interviewed him a million times, and I like him, and I think when he, if and when he becomes a champion, he's going to be popular because he's got that ability to relate to people. He's kind of young and doesn't have the maturity level yet to relate to people as a 19-year-old. I think when you were 19 and whatnot, but. You give him a couple of years, and I think he's going to be a guy that goes, I'm just not sold on him being the next Uber guy, right? And that's, I think, what Joe Tess and Tim Bradley were trying to sell him as, the next Loma or the next really, really, really big guy. I think he's nice. He's got some good skills. I don't know that he punches hard enough to be that guy. And I don't know that he's he's a good boxer, not a great boxer. So he's kind of in between on some of that stuff. So I like him as a prospect. I think he's really made a lot of progress this year. And I give him a lot of credit for fighting as often as he's fighting. I just would say pump the brakes a little bit on this, greatness talk.
Kevin, which three prospects do get the Kevin Iole seal of approval?
Well, to me, the guy that I like the most, I think he fought once this year is Keyshawn Davis. I think he's a guy that I really, really like. And so, I think he's a guy that I would say I think has a chance to be an elite fighter, and in this sport. Guy, I don't know what the criteria is. I have my own criteria that I use for prospects, and I don't know what criteria you guys use, but a guy that I think still has an unlimited potential of getting older is Daniel Dubois. I love him, as a heavyweight. I think he's a guy that, is just on the verge of being ready to fight the big guys, the big names. And I think he's got a chance to be really, really good. In the same, I guess along those lines, I like Jaron Ennis, but I think Jaron Ennis is more of a known quantity. Still hasn't had that big fight, that really tough opponent where you say, okay, he was pushed and he passed, he passed. And I don't think his fight got Delorme, I think, is not probably going to be that guy either. But I think Jaron has a chance to be damn good.
Moving on that card, the grandson of the greatest, Nico Ali Walsh gets the second win of his young career with the third round TKO over James Wesley. Kevin, you mentioned how Tim Bradley and Joe Tessitore during the broadcast with Xander Zayas, obviously the connection between Nico Ali Walsh and his grandfather was also heavily hyped up during the broadcast. What do you think about his performance? And, what do you think about, because obviously this is it's a big name to live up to, and can he live up to it?
Well, I remember when Layla was fighting and she was just starting, and it was, the daughter of the greatest, and she had that pressure on her. Now, Layla, some people think, not me, I think Lucia Riker, but some people think she was the greatest women's fighter of all time. She went through her career undefeated, beat everybody. She tried to get a fight with Ann Wolfe. I know that was a big bone of contention. I talked to Richard Schaefer about it. He tried to put the fight on, said Layla was in. But I think, he faces a similar thing that, his Aunt Layla faced. And I think, he has her as a sounding board to talk to and get out. I don't think he's as talented as she is, but this is one I like because I saw Raging Babe on Twitter was kind of expressing a little bit of, has reservation, but I think boxing needs draws and boxing needs to get people into it because we have a good product, right? And if you can get people to watch Shakur Stevenson by saying, "Hey, we got Muhammad Ali's grandson and this great junior lightweight title fight coming up," even if they tune in to see Nico Ali Walsh, they end up seeing Shakur Stevenson, and I think so it's not bad to put guys like that on. What is his ceiling? Who knows? He doesn't look to me like he is much of a fighter, but he has had almost no amateur background. He's really learning everything as a pro. The fact that Sugar Hill Stewart is training him will tell you that Sugar Hill thinks he has some ability. Sugar Hill's not going to mess with, no talent, no hope guys, So I think Sugar Hill looks at it and goes, hey, he might go out there and make a few bucks and win a few fights. To me, it's like there's nothing like if his name was Joe Smith, or let's not say Joe Smith because there is a Joe Smith, John Doe. If his name was John Doe and we looked at him, he doesn't wow you with his quickness. He doesn't wow you with his boxing skill. He doesn't have this great footwork. He's not this big, huge puncher. You say, what is it that he does, right? What makes him, differentiated from other people? And probably nothing. And so, if he's a guy that fights middle of the road fighters and wins most of his fights, loses a couple, but can set up cards and bring people, I think he serves a purpose. And I don't have a problem with that. I don't want to see him, taking over spots. Like when Top Rank back in the day was putting Butterbean and Mia St. John, on. They weren't putting Mia St. John on because they wanted to support women's boxing. They were putting her on because she had been in Playboy magazine and they knew dudes would want to see her, fighting. And so, hey, if you support women's boxing, great. I'm all for you. And we don't talk about what they look like. We talk about how athletic they are. But at that time, they were putting Mia St. John on. They referred to her as the knockout, her looks. And then also Butterbean. They had two of four spots on pay-per-view cards. That was wrong. You're taking spots away from legit fighters. But this on ESPN or ESPN Plus, where, this kid is going to be the entree for other fighters. People who watch Nico saw Xander Zayas and they heard Tim Bradley say greatness. Maybe Xander Zayas got a fan. So I don't have a problem with what's going on, the way they're moving him now. If when he's 11-0, all of a sudden he starts getting ranked high and everything, well, maybe that's a different story. And we can talk about that at that time. But I think what's happening with him is appropriate.
And then also on that card, fruits of labor type of event here. Evan Holyfield, the son of the real deal Evander Holyfield, gets the 8th win of his career with the second round KO over Charles Stanford. Obviously, Evan Holyfield here has a little bit more fighting experience. He has a little bit more professional fights at this point. What's your take on Evan?
I did not see that whole fight. I only saw the highlight because I was at UFC on Saturday, and I got home and then saw the main card. So I got finished and I turned on and I saw the end of Alabama and then the fight card. So I missed Holyfield's fight. I saw the results, but I've seen Holyfield fight in person 3-4 times. I think he's kind of a lot like Nico. I don't know that we're going to see him be a big factor. He's got a famous father. He's got some skill. I don't think the thing that made Evander so incredible was that, he just had that desire. And how can you you grew up as a rich kid, your father was one of the greatest fighters of all time. It's hard to have that desire like like his father did. Few people in the history of the sport ever could match Evander Holyfield and the desire and the will to win, like Holyfield had. And so I don't think Evan is going to be a big star either. I think, when you compare him to Nico Walsh, probably better than Walsh, but I think, along those lines as an attraction because of who his father is. And the camera can go to Vanderon sitting in the stands and say, there's the former undisputed champion, and it kind of, reminisce a little bit. I think that'll be his, in my opinion, his value. I don't see him being a world champion.
Kevin, how much do you think that Top Rank is betting on the fact that either of these young guys kind of pan out and they might be able to make some type of attraction in each of them or one of them? Because obviously there's an investment here in any fighter, but especially with guys who have come from a legacy of a family legacy like this.
Well, I think, Top Rank has arguably the two best matchmakers of the last half century, right? In Bruce Trampler and Brad Goodman. And I said arguably, there's been a lot of good matchmakers out there, but these two guys know what they're doing. Bruce Trampler's already in the Hall of Fame. Brad Goodman's on the ballot this year, could well get in. They're smart guys. They know what they're doing. And Trampler in particular, you look at the way he moved Oscar De La Hoya, and he expertly moved him. He did the same thing with Floyd Mayweather. Like I remember, because I covered in person 43 of Floyd's 50 fights. And so I talked to Trampler numerous times for stories about, what they were doing. I remember when they fought this guy, Tony Pep, and I went, I think it was in Atlanta, it was either Philadelphia or Atlantic City, somewhere back east. And I made the trip for that fight. And I'm like, why is he fighting this guy? And, he was a big, tall, skinny guy. And Trampler said to me the day before the fight, he goes, you can't look at him and you can't tell me why. And I said, no. Because, well, there's a guy in his weight division named Diego Corrales, and he's going to fight Diego Corrales someday. And and when he fights Diego Corrales, he's going to remember Pep and remember seeing the guy with the long arms. So that was the extent that they worked with Mayweather and De La Hoya and guys like that. I don't think they're matchmaking that hard with Nico or Evan. I think that, they're sitting there going, okay, we don't want to get him beat. So we want to get guys that maybe can push them a little bit, but aren't going to get them beat. And that's what they're doing. So I think that's easy for Brad and Bruce. That's what they're good at. Find guys that, would have to fight the fight of their lives to beat them. And, hey, it could happen. But so I don't have a problem with what Top Rank's doing. And I think, hey, they're just kind of rolling the dice. You know what? If one or both of them catches, fire and people get into them, great. They don't have a big investment in them. I think Nico Walsh has already paid whatever they've paid him. He's brought that back. Look at all the attention he's gotten, before he fought his first pro fight. I mean, everybody did Zooms with this guy, and everybody wrote stories about him. And I was on PBS. I did an interview about that Ali documentary, and they brought that up to me. This, you interviewed Ali's grandson, and it was like, so everything, Nico's already brought that back. I mean, the day that I talked to him on Zoom for my piece I did on him, I think he had done like 12 or 15 radio spots that day. And, and so he was pretty tired of talking when I got to him, but, so I think he's already paid off for what they invested in him. He got them enormous amounts of free media that brought attention to their two fight cards he was on.
Kevin, you mentioned Bruce Trampler this week. He had some Twitter back and forth with some, I don't know what type of accounts they were, but some people got involved in the conversation about Daniel Kinahan, about the whole MTK and the advising, and then the legal troubles that I guess he's allegedly had. For the boxing fans or our listeners who don't know what that situation is, because the reason I brought that up is because Bruce Trampler was tweeting some stuff about him, and some other people piled on, and people sent him links in regards to Daniel Kinahan's alleged situation overseas and all that stuff. And then Bruce responded, "Oh, this is interesting. Thanks for enlightening me." Kind of acknowledging, "Oh, I've never seen this, but thank you for showing it to me." What is that whole situation with somebody like Daniel Kinahan and his advising of fighters, MTK? What's that whole situation if you had to summarize it?
Well, it's a guy, that, the government of his country said he's, he's organized crime, right? Now they have different laws than we do, but he's been referred to as an organized crime member by the government of his country. He's living in either Dubai or Abu Dhabi because he can't get, into Ireland, right? So, he's not even able to get into his country. There was a shooting at a weigh-in a few years ago, and allegedly it was a drug battle, and he was, allegedly behind that. He's never been charged with it. It's never been proven that it was him. But there's been allegations that it was him, and so but he looks at boxing. There's been a lot of guys that have gotten into boxing, with less than savory reputations, and so he's one of those guys. Now I don't know that he's since he's been in boxing, it seems to me that what he's done has been good for the fighters, right? I don't know what his deal with the fighters is, but hey, look what he did when he got involved with Tyson Fury. I think we could say Tyson Fury now is one of the biggest stars in the sport, and I think part of that was Kinahan getting him with Top Rank and kind of forcing Frank Warren to move him and do things with him. And I think if you go, down the list of some of the guys he represents, now, how far do we get involved with this guy, right? Do you want to, when you sleep with the dogs, you get fleas, right? And do you really want to be involved with this guy that has all these allegations against him? That is a difficult question. But Terence Crawford, who was with them, and now he's advised by Kinahan, so it's like, where's this coming from, right? So they're kind of stuck, if they don't want to do business with Kinahan, then they have to cut ties with a lot of really good fighters. So I see both sides of it. But I say this, I believe, and I know he's not an American, right? I believe in our system of justice, and he's not been accused of a crime, formally. People have said he's done it, but he hasn't been formally accused by an agency of a crime, and so we can't treat him as a criminal until he's convicted in court. I guess that's how I look at it. But I understand the people that feel like it's an unsavory element. But it goes back to the mob days in boxing, right? The mob used to run boxing, and there was no doubt about that, right? You can't argue that one.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting situation, especially with his network of fighters he's representing that it keeps growing as the months and years go by. So it's definitely an interesting situation to observe from the outside. This upcoming Saturday, fight previews the 30th of October from the O2 Arena in London on DAZN, headlined by Chantel Cameron, 14-0, goes up against Mary McGee for the WBC and IBF super lightweight titles. And also Alan the Savage Babbage returns 8-0 against Eric Molina, 28-7. Kevin, how many have you covered any fights in the UK? And if you have, how many have you covered?
I've covered quite a few. I haven't traveled as much the last 3 or 4 years. Certainly since the pandemic, we've been grounded, so we haven't traveled. I'm not complaining about that because I had my years where I did 100,000 or more miles. But I did a lot of fights in the UK over the years. I think my favorite experience in the UK was probably just because of how crazy this was. Kessler and Calzaghe, I covered that fight, and that was in Cardiff, Wales. And I just remember we were staying at a little Hilton. It was kind of like at this town square on the top of downtown. And so I was with Tim Smith, who at that time was with the New York Daily News. He's now the PR person for PBC, and Kevin Flaherty from HBO. And we wanted to know if we could walk over to the stadium, Millennium Stadium, where the fights were. So I asked at the front desk, and I was more concerned not distance wise, but like, was it safe to walk? And so I asked the guy at the front desk, hey, is it safe? And he goes, oh yeah, mate, it's safe, don't worry. He goes, just when you come back, just be careful you don't fall over all the drunks in the town square. And I thought it was a joke, and I walk back, we come back, and there's all these guys literally passed out drunk on the ground, and that was the funniest thing I had ever seen.
Mike, does that sound pretty accurate?
Yeah, just a usual British town on a weekend.
It was so funny. I couldn't believe it. Kevin Flaherty and Tim and I were all just, we were dying. And, he said he wasn't lying. And there's guys just laying there and their bottles in their hand. It was crazy.
What fight would it take you to go back and cover? Would it have to be like a Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua, or a Tyson Fury, Alexander Usyk?
That's not a fair question, because if it were me, I would go for any fight, right? Because A, I love the UK, and B, I love the fights, right? So it wouldn't take much to get me to go. It's my bosses, right? So, to convince them to get me to go is a different story. Now we've been sold, so we'll see. We're still operating under the old, procedures from, we were owned by Verizon. Now we're owned by Apollo Global. And I think things are going to change, so we'll see what happens. I can't predict, how they're going to treat that. But, I would think, a major fight like that would be, Usyk and Joshua rematch, or, Fury and Joshua, something like that. There would be no way that I wouldn't be there.
That it's an interesting point, Kevin, that, obviously everybody has somebody they answer to at their job, management and stuff like that. Has there ever been a point where there was a fight that you wanted to cover, where you had to travel, but your bosses at the time kind of declined the request, so you had to sell them on it and say, hey, look, this is what's going on. This is why I need to cover it. This is what's the attention that it's getting. And then you changed their mind and you were able to go.
I've had it happen both ways, The one that really bothers me was a UFC fight. I wanted to go to Australia to cover Ronda Rousey against Holly Holm. And they said no, and I couldn't convince them. And they said, what? You said Ronda's going to blow everybody out as well. Holly Holm's a little different. Ronda should win, but it's a little bit different. Holly Holm's a better fighter. Blah 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 blah. And now all of a sudden, Ronda loses. It's the greatest upset of all time. And I probably wrote 2 stories a day for like 2 weeks after that. Literally, I was writing every day, multiple stories. We were getting so much traffic on that. And it was like, but the night of the fight, somebody called me and says, could you call Ronda's mom? And I'm like, get the hell out of here. I'm not calling Ronda's mom,
That's interesting. Well, you said it goes both ways. So was there a time where it happened from where they said yes and then maybe they changed their mind?
Well, once they've said yes, I don't think I've ever been, then they'd said, no, we're not going to do that. But I've had fights where they've said no, and then I was able to convince them, who was it? It was Calzaghe and Roy Jones, who was in Madison Square Garden, wasn't it? Yeah. Because I keep thinking Hopkins, too. And Hopkins was in Vegas. So I think it was Roy Jones and Calzaghe was at Madison Square Garden, and I wanted to cover that fight. I originally got a no, and then I was able to convince them and said, hey, this is going to be a big fight. We'll get the traffic. And then I got the green light to go, and I did it.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. Also, this upcoming weekend in Las Vegas, where you're from, Kevin, on Showtime from the Mandalay Bay Resort and Casino for the WBA Welterweight World Championship. Jamal James, 27-1, goes up against Razdab Butiav. Hopefully I said that right. I probably didn't. The undefeated. He's 13-0. What do you think about Jamal James? And then also, is this a real world title fight for the WBA welterweight title?
I will give the WBA a lot of credit. They're trying to make some of the changes that, they realized the mistake they made. And I think they were really, in a bad situation, and they had a lot of pressure on them. So they started rescinding these interim titles and these different titles. But we know who the welterweight champion of the world is, right? And it is not Jamal James. I'm sorry, Jamal. It's not you. You are not, Earl Spence is the champion, and Ugas, was a WBC champion, beat Pacquiao, and that was a legitimate. So those are the guys. Spence is the champion. So where the hell Jamal James has the belt? So this is just, to me, a welterweight fight, right? I mean, it's not a title fight. It's just a welterweight fight to move somebody into position to get a bigger fight.
We touched on Jaron Boots Ennis. He's also on the card, going up against Thomas Delorme. Do you think PBC is hoping to match Jamal James and Ennis maybe in a subsequent matchup, since they're both on this card and they both fight at welterweight?
I think that certainly could be, something that they do. I mean, I think Ennis has a chance to be special. And so I think he needs to start getting those those bigger fights, right? I think we need to see him with guys that aren't going to just fall over when he blows on them, right? I mean, I think that Jamal, should he win, would be a guy like that. I would expect Ennis to beat James, but I mean, I think at this stage of Jaron's development, that would be a good fight for him. But I think there would be some options for him out there. What's the guy that fought Crawford, the Lithuanian guy? I think that Kevin, that's right. Yeah. I think I heard his name mentioned too. Two big power punchers. That might be one that they do. But I think we have to get Ennis, and I don't want to dog Delorme, but I think he's kind of at the end of it, and at the end of the run, and he's not what he once was at his peak. So this isn't going to prove a hell of a lot if he knocks out Delorme. He's a veteran and knows his way around there, but I don't think it's going to be a defining fight for him. But I think then the next couple fights should start to be fights that he gets a little bit of resistance.
Kevin, who's closer to a world title bout? Is it Boots Ennis or Virgil Ortiz?
That is really interesting. That would be a hell of a fight right now, for both of them. I mean, I think, I guess I would say Virgil. I think Virgil has been in there with a little bit better competition. And so I think, I would make that argument that he's probably a little bit further along. I think I'll tell you what. If you ask me who would win if they fought right now, that's a tough fight. That is a really, really tough fight. I think the one thing I like about Virgil is that I think Virgil has a complete game. Virgil can box and punch, and Jaron, we'll see. I mean, I think he likes to say that he can box and punch, but we haven't seen him show those skills against high enough competition yet. But I think that's a fun fight. I mean, I would not argue, why not, and I think you look at, this is the UFC style of doing business. Put these kind of matchups in these young guys because you increase both of their visibilities. I know promoters are afraid to quote unquote lose a, guy, but you're not losing anything. If one of those two guys loses and it's a good, compelling fight, we're talking about both of them. We want to see them both come back. The only way the loss really matters is if one guy sucks and, just, totally shits the bed and we look at him and go, holy, this guy was terrible. Then that's a different story. But I mean, these two guys are real fighters. They're real contenders. They're quality. So I would think, whoever won the fight, would be elevated. Whoever lost would not decline, would just be where they were before. And we would still want to see both of them fight. So to me, make the fight. That's what I want to see.
Do you think that the combination of Boots Ennis and Ortiz is essentially the next conversation? Because we're from recent memory, we've had Crawford Spence, even though they haven't fought, but that's been the conversation. Right. And then we had, Pacquiao Mayweather. That was for years, that was a conversation. Do you think Boots and Ortiz could be that next conversation like that?
I do. I mean, I think, both, they both have good personalities. They're both knockout punchers. I think that both guys have the ability to bring people into the fold, right? And so I think there'll be debate out there among the audience, who will win between them. There's going to be some, supporters of Jaron, and there's going to be some supporters of Virgil, and they'll have their battles and go back and forth. And I think that's really what you look for when you get that. So I think that's going to be one of the fights that will be of the next generation fighters, the guys who aren't world champions yet. That's going to be one of the defining fights, I think, and rivalries.
Right. Yeah. Hopefully it is. It seems like they're on that path.
Kind of like we have the 35, with all those guys. Fight each other, boys. Don't chicken out. Fight each other.
Mm-hmm. Oh, hopefully. Well, Jojo Diaz and Devin Haney seem like they're. I mean, what's the stat now that you mentioned 35? Is there any latest news that you've heard on that negotiation?
Oscar said yesterday, still not done, and so disappointing. I thought that Jojo had indicated it was close to being done. I think that's a fight that should be a no-brainer to make. and get done. And hopefully it will be, but as of yesterday afternoon, it was not finished. So, a little work there. I like what happened, with Lopez and Haney after the fight. Where was it? 2 weeks ago? I can't remember what fight it was when they were
Fresno on DAZN. Yeah,
that show. They were nose to nose. Mikey and Sandor Martin. They were nose to nose after the fight. I liked what I saw there. Disappointed Ryan Garcia got hurt again, but I think that there's a lot of fights there to make and a lot of fun fights. And I just think we need to get, Gervonta Davis and Devin Haney and Teofimo Lopez and all these guys, under one umbrella fighting each other. And, this guy's going to fight. Go back to the Four Kings days. What made them so big? Obviously, they were great talents and they had great personalities, but they fought each other. And we talked, when we would debate the merits of them, and we made them bigger because we talked about them so much. And it just, and I think these kids have the ability. Rolly Romero, another one. There. You have a chance to have a lot of really good fights in that division. And Shakur will be there at some point.
Absolutely. Yeah. When Shakur gets there, it's definitely going to add a lot more to that mix. So it's definitely looking forward to that. Rounding off that card, Michael Rivera, 21-0, goes up against Jose Romero. And also this upcoming weekend from the theater at the Madison Square Garden in New York City on ESPN, Jose Chon Cepeda, 34-2, goes up against Josue Vargas. How do you look at somebody like Zepeda, Kevin? Can he get to a world title? It seems like Top Rank is trying to move him to at least get into another world title bout. Does that seem correct?
Hey, look, I mean, he had that really good fight with Ramirez a couple years ago, that unbelievable battle in the bubble with Branchik, right? Just that incredible, back and forth fight. He's a guy that people want to watch fight. And I think he's a good guy to have, on your roster. If you're Top Rank and you're putting on all these shows on ESPN, they need a lot of bodies, and so he's a good guy to have on the roster. I think, is he good enough to be a world champion? Yes. Is he going to win a world champion in this current iteration? Given where the titles are, they're all rest with one guy. And even if they start getting split up, I don't know that he's ever going to be able to get it done because, it's going to take some luck. Taylor's going to have one of the titles stripped from him, and then he's going to have to be ranked. Whoever gets stripped, he's going to have to be ranked in the right spot in that organization. So it's kind of depends on how it breaks. He'll need to get some breaks there. But I think he's a kid. He's good enough to win a world title. I don't think he's good enough to be, a defining guy. It would be like there are guys that I call transitional champions. They're good enough to win it. They're good enough to compete in the division, but they're not going to be really, a guy for any long period of time. But we remember their names when we see them. I think that's the kind of guy he would be. But you tell me if Zepeda's on TV or fighting down the street from me, I'll watch him anytime.
Right. Yeah, definitely. He's definitely TV friendly. As we round the corner here towards the finish line on this week's episode of The Last Round, Kevin, Anthony Joshua in the last week or so had made some headlines as he was in the United States seemingly touring some of the more prominent trainers. What did you hear about that? What's your take on that situation? And do you think he will leave Rob McCracken?
I did, Coogan Cassius interviewed Anthony today, and I have that queued up to watch. I haven't seen it yet, so I haven't heard what Anthony said. And I guess the best answer is let's see what Anthony said to Coogan, and we'll know the answer to that. I said right from the fight, I think McCracken is a smart boxing guy, but I think Anthony at least needs another voice in the corner. Number one, they've been together for a long period of time, and sometimes the message gets stale. Right. And I think that's something that, so you could keep McCracken there, but hey, let's bring another set of eyes in. What are things that Anthony's doing that we can improve on? Your training methods, your, the way you prepare, the little habits you have and that type of thing. Anthony Joshua is a stud athlete. You're a big, strong dude. He's 6'6", 240, 250 pounds. You got, a lot going for you. Now, I think the whole is less than the sum of its parts right now. I think if you look at all his individual skills, they're going, wow. And then you see him in the ring and he loses fights that he shouldn't lose. But I don't think he's a lost cause by any stretch of the imagination. So I think they should bring somebody else in, and some of the people that they talk to, Ronnie Shields would be a really good guy with him. I think there's a lot of guys out there. I'll tell you who I think, I don't believe that Anthony talked to him, but Stephen Breadman Edwards would really make a good trainer for him. Breadman is really good with the fundamentals, a smart boxing guy, strategic guy. I think he would be a good guy for AJ. But I think, Ronnie Shields would be high on my list if I had a guy like a Anthony Joshua that was looking to bring in a new trainer. Ronnie's a guy that, you can take what you have and make it better.
Don't you think too as well, Kevin, that if AJ came to the United States and did end up switching trainers and trained over here for a couple months out of the year or what have you, don't you think it would also help the marketing, the American marketing behind his image as well?
100%. Like what DAZN did last time, and Eddie Hearn, let's be honest, I think Eddie is the best promoter in boxing now. But what he did last time, it was disgraceful with Anthony Joshua. Like no American media got one-on-one time with Anthony Joshua before he fought Usyk. And they were dicking around with us like crazy, even trying to get him on a Zoom call with a bunch of people where you could get one question, and it was like, it shows what DAZN really thinks of the U.S. market, which is nothing. It's now just secondary to the British market for them. That the U.S. market, they try to say was important to them, and now we know, because when they had their most risk at stake, they didn't give a shit about the American market, right? They didn't even put Anthony Joshua with us. I requested Joshua and Usyk, didn't get either guy, and I can't remember the last time on a fight, Yahoo, at that time, and I don't know if we still are, but coming out of the Olympics, we went to number one on the ComScore rankings among sports websites. So we were the number one sports site in the world at that point. Now, ESPN obviously is the dominant with the television and everything, but from a website standpoint, we had the most traffic. And I couldn't get freaking either one of those two heavyweights on our site for a 15-minute interview on Zoom or to telephone. And it just shows what they thought about the United States. So I agree with you, Danny. If they bring him to the U.S. and they have him over here, AJ is a wonderful guy. And if you meet him in person, you will like him. And if you get him exposed to people, people look what happened to Tyson Fury. Tyson Fury wasn't the kind of likable guy that Anthony Joshua is, but Tyson Fury is damn popular over here now, right? And people feel opposite ways about him, which is what you want. There's some people that hate him, and there's some people that love him. And that's perfect, right? Because now you have people that want to watch you fight. You don't want people in the middle going, he's all right. AJ right now is just to American fans. And I think he needs to get, to do something about that. And I think bringing him over here would be a great move.
We got Canelo Plant in the next week and a half or so. What's your take on that fight?
I'll tell you what, unless I'm missing something, and I don't think I am, I just don't see how Caleb has a chance. God bless him. I love his story and I love what he's trying to do. And I love the confidence and bravado he's showing. But I look at Canelo and I go, this is an elite fighter at the top of his game. And I look at Caleb as just another guy out there. Right. And, I don't see him as being any more special than any other super middleweight. I think he got, he's had an easy road to get to this point. It was kind of like, you're in the NCAA tournament and, the lower seeded teams win and you're, in there and you just breeze through to the finals because you didn't play any of the, the top teams. I think that's kind of where Caleb is. I don't know if we were to consider this a round robin. I don't know if you considered Smith and Saunders and Plant and Canelo. I don't know that you wouldn't have said Plant was the number 4 seed when you started this off, and now but he happens to be in the finals because of just the timing of the way it worked out. I just think Canelo wins this fight, 7-8 rounds. I think a one-sided fight, in my opinion, but I've been wrong before.
Kevin, this weekend should have been Dillian White against Otto Wallin. Obviously, Dillian ended up pulling out through injury. Listen to some recent interviews. Right, that's what I was going to kind of get to. In some of the interviews, it shows that Wallin's team was saying, well, where's the independent doctors, pictures and review to confirm this? From your years in the game, what can you tell us about the rules and regulations about having an independent doctor show there is an injury?
You wish that there would be rules like that, but that's not how it works in boxing. This is boxing. You should know that by now. And, it's kind of like depends on who you are and how popular you are and how popular your promoter is and, a bunch of things like that. So Dillian White says he's not healthy enough to fight. He doesn't fight. And I just think, that the WBC has to take a stance here and not force Tyson Fury to fight Otto Wallin now, or Dillian, who knows what they're going to freaking do. But we've already seen the Otto Wallin fighting. Hey, it was a good fight. And I don't have a problem with it if Otto wins a fight to get into it. And then I have a big problem with Dillian getting a shot with doing nothing, right? So I think Dillian needs to come back, get healthy, beat somebody like a Wallin, and then we'll see. I would have a problem with it, and I would scream to the blue heavens if they gave Dillian White the next shot at Tyson Fury.
Kevin, what's the latest? One last thing before we let you go here, Kevin. What's the latest on Terence Crawford's contract situation with Top Rank? Obviously, he's fighting Sean Porter November 20th in Las Vegas. But this is, I believe, has been reported that this is his final fight with Top Rank. What chatter have you heard? Have you talked to Top Rank about this? Does it seem like he's going to resign?
Excuse me, I have not had any conversation with them recently. Now, the one thing I know that they put in their contracts is this kind of like this tolling clause. And if you get injured or fight gets canceled or we offer you a fight, you don't take it, the contract goes forward by a few more days or whatever, right? So I have a feeling that when this fight is over, we're going to hear his contract is not exactly over tonight, that he has. But I think, we can say, from what I can gather, just looking in and talking to Terence, heart and soul is not with Top Rank anymore, right? And I think, you can have how many more days you want and you can make them sit out if you want to do that. But if his heart and soul isn't there with you, then, I think Top Rank's going to have a big sell job. Now, the one issue that I think before, if this would have happened, everybody's going to say, well, the PBC is the landing spot. But the PBC is kind of losing their guys, too. It used to be, they had Spence and Thurman and Garcia and Porter and, whoever else. And now, who knows if we'll ever see Thurman fight again. Danny Garcia is not a fight for Terence Crawford. He's fighting Porter. The only fight that's really there is Spence, and you don't necessarily have to be the PBC now to make that fight. So I think, Top Rank's going to have to do a sell job on him because I think he's frustrated the way things have played out. But I think, that they're in the game. I would not say that they're totally out of it. If you would ask me a year ago, I said, he's never going to resign, and he's going to go to PBC. But the fight, that's why they let it play out. The fight business played out. Guys lost fights. Guys, didn't look at, they also have Pacquiao. Remember, don't forget him. And they don't, so now, how attractive is the PBC as a destination, now to Terence Crawford compared to a year ago? Probably less, so, it'll be, I think that there'll be some interesting bidding for his services.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like he might kind of go the Canelo route, how Canelo's
perfect.
I think he's going to be doing that, especially now that he sees how Canelo's been doing it. Because I think Crawford, I don't want to compare that he has Canelo power, but I think he has enough power where he can go fight by fight and generate interest, if that makes sense.
He doesn't have the power that Canelo has from the standpoint of Canelo is a far bigger draw. Both, if we eliminate, and I would dare say that Canelo would sell have a bigger gate in Omaha than Terence Crawford would, right? Sell big, more amount of tickets, not a more amount of tickets, but dollars of tickets. And then anywhere else in the world, Canelo would blow him away, and then it's on pay-per-view. So Terence doesn't have that kind of power, but Terence is one of the best fighters in the world, arguably the best, and promoters want to promote those kind of guys' fights. And you never know when a huge fight pops out, and if you have that guy that's number one in the world, you can always land a major fight. And so people are going to want him. So I think you made a very apt point. He could do the Canelo thing and just say, okay, Top Rank, I'll sign with you for this fight, and then I'm going to come back to PBC for this. And I think it might work.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Kevin, we definitely always appreciate your valuable time here on The Last Round. And once again, you know the drill. Let people know what you have upcoming and where they can find your work.
Everything I have on Yahoo Sports. So if you go to our boxing page and just bookmark click on my name on any story I write, and you'll get my entire archive of stories, and you can see that. I'm on Twitter at Kevin I, and on Instagram at Kevin Iole, KEVINIOLE.
And Mike, go ahead and let our listeners and followers know where they can find us and follow us.
We're at The Last Round 12 on Instagram and Twitter, and be sure to join us next week. We'll be previewing the big Canelo Alvarez against Caleb Plant fight.
So for our guest of the week in Yahoo Sports, Kevin Iole, from my co-host Michael Shepard, I'm Danny Z. This is The Last Round.
Thanks for supporting and listening to the show. Follow us at The Last Round 12 on social media. Rate, review, and subscribe. This is The Last Round Podcast.